Yeah, my name is John Himmelstein. I've been tattooing 40 years, since 1986. And I am here at Tropical Tattoo in Daytona Beach, Florida. I really wasn't into tattoo in 1986. There was really, nothing in my circle. None of my friends got tattooed. No one on television had tattoos. It wasn't popular at all. Friends of mine started getting tattoos and asked me to draw pictures for them. I didn't know what they needed, so I just drew pictures. They came back with my pictures on them. Eventually, the guy who they were getting the tattoos from, Charlie Bond in Orlando at Ancient Art, he suggested, he's like, who's this guy? Can I bring him in? I want to meet him. And I went in to my friend's suggestions, and he said, hey, you interested in tattooing? I was like, okay. Dumb kid, I wasn't interested, but kind of. It was something to do. I didn't have a job. It was like, okay, this will be something to do. When I started to learn, then I got interested. Charlie at that time, he said my art reminded him of an artist named Greg Irons at the time. And I wish I was close to Greg Irons, but that's what led him to want to teach me. Up to that point, everything I'd seen, I'd see the same crappy eagle on the guy working at the gas station, and I would see the same crappy eagle on the same guy I'd see down at the store or something like that. And I knew the chances of someone drawing the same bad drawing twice were nil, so I thought, oh, it must be stamps or something, and with their stamps, why don't they make any good ones? I just never looked twice, and once I got into it, I started to see there were good ones, lots of them, and I just wasn't looking in the right place, and then I got interested. When I knew you could just draw and make your own stuff, that piqued my interest, and been doing it ever since, along with a bunch of other things in between. I've drawn since I was a little kid. I didn't know drawing was a thing until I got to kindergarten and the other kids couldn't draw. My mom used to draw little ladybugs and butterflies when I was really little. It must have just cemented in my head. Of course, those are the only things she could draw, but I thought that, wow, she could draw anything. Drawing was just something I had to learn, like walking and using a toilet and using silverware. I never thought I was any good at it. It was only when I got to kindergarten and the other kids were way worse that I was like, oh, maybe this is something. At this point in my life, I'm still learning something new every single day. I struggle to not learn something. I can't know enough. And that transfers to everything else, to painting, drawing, sculpting, animating, and tattoos. If I learn something with a painting, I can apply it to tattoos. If I learn something with tattoos, I can apply it to illustrations. It all works hand in hand. Before tattooing, oh man, it was probably, that was, 60s, 70s, so it was, Frazetta, the old Frazetta. But I also loved, Jack Kirby, Bernie Wrightson. Bernie Wrightson's art led me to Franklin Booth. But I like the underground comic guys, too, a lot, like Richard Corben and,
Ralph
Bakshi, Bakshi Animation, yeah, for sure. It was non-Disney animation was always good. I just got a big box from Heavy Metal the other day. I joined their Kickstarter for a bunch of boxes. It's got Ranzerov, so yeah, Liberator, that's definitely one on there. All the Heavy Metal, and comic books were huge influences. That definitely took me from, comic book to illustration, and then going to school, going to college and taking commercial art courses and stuff. I was always like, where's the part where I'm going to paint like Frazetta? Where's the part where I get to learn how to, dinosaurs fighting barbarians? When am I going to learn that? And unfortunately, none of those schools teach that. When I started, I learned in Ancient Art in Orlando, Florida. There were 3 tattoo shops at the time. It was Ancient Art, Sailor Bill, and Tattoo Tony. Way out in the middle of nowhere, you couldn't tattoo in the city limits. And tattoos weren't popular at that time. They were popular among, bikers, military. Every once in a while, you get an individual in there. Us punk rock kids loved them, but us punk rock kids had no money. So, it was hardly any of us. And it was, it was pretty small, but it was tight. It was also different. Everybody had their own style. There wasn't a there's this and that, and traditional and neo-traditional, and all these styles that came up in the 90s. People were just different. You know, this guy tattooed like this guy tattooed. Gil Monte's skull looked like a Gil Monte skull. Charlie Bond's skull looked like a Charlie Bond skull. One wasn't better than the other. They weren't comparative. Just like real artists in real life, everyone was different. You know, in the 90s it all started to unify. But when I was learning in the 80s, the only, no one on MTV had any tattoos. No one in the zeitgeist or the public eye had any tattoos. There was I saw Axl Rose get on there with some tattoos. I was like, finally, we're going to get some people my age coming in the shop. You know, and it did have a result. You know, once people saw other people with them, like much like me when I first saw a decent tattoo, I got interested, you know. And that's all I had to do was see something nice. Tattooing to me was always a stepping stone to something else. And I'm still stepping on those stones and realize I'm on this big old stairwell and it's too far down to go back. But I just find myself getting pulled back into it all the time. I'm in control of what I do most of the time, and I like that. I'm my own person, and you know, it's pretty nice. It's you know, I enjoy doing it, you know. But I enjoy a challenge. But when you challenge yourself, it's also difficult. It can be a pain in the butt, and you're kicking yourself and going, why did I do this? I could have done this, and it was so much easier. But the end result makes everything worthwhile at the end. And at the same time, when you get to the end of the challenge, then you've gone up a notch. You know, I've leveled up, so to speak. I've seen good artists do bad tattoos, and I've seen bad artists do good tattoos. As tattoos go, you know what makes a good tattoo? Something that's done well, that heals well, that has longevity to it, and you can tell what it is, you know. But art is so subjective. I mean, people bring me stuff all the time, and it might be pretty terrible, you know, but that's what they want, you know, and I'll do my best to make it better. Tattoos are also billboards. So even though they're getting it and they're commissioning me for this piece and they want it this way, when it leaves, other people are going to see that. And they're not going to give them the long-winded, why it means so much explanation to that viewer outside that they did to me. They're just going to go, yeah, he messed up, when the person goes, that's horrible, you know. Yeah, they're not going to say, yeah, the artist told me it's horrible, he recommended I didn't do this, but I went ahead and told him to do it anyway. It's easier to say, yeah, he screwed up. It's a fine line, finding that balance. You know, most of the time you just give them what they want, but if they want something bad, that's going to make us look bad and not look good. You know, there's some things that we've had to turn away. People want some really horrendous shit written on them that they would have regretted. But as far as art goes, every artist has value. I had a friend growing up, we'd make our own comic books, and he was by far the worst artist out of all of us. But his books were the funniest, and they were the best written. And his art was consistently bad to where it became a style. And I think every style has value. It may not be to everyone's taste, but you know, and then some of that translates to a good tattoo and some of it doesn't. For me, it's about the art. My experiences with getting tattooed is it freaking hurts. I don't know what I don't know what all that stuff is, you know. I know from my perspective, yeah, people sit there and can't wait till it's over and they get a nice tattoo. I don't know. I think maybe the experience of building up to it is something like, for me, the equivalent of looking at the Sears wish book when I was a kid and then for Christmas and circling what I wanted. You know, I think that experience is exciting for people when they can, you know, and now with AI, I've had people just do the whole thing and come in and bring me a design that they've designed. It saves me a lot of time, and all I have to do is polish it out from there. So I think that experience is probably fun for them, but you'd have to ask them. From my perspective, it's just work, and I'm just trying to do the job. At the same time, I'm trying to make sure they have a good time. You know, I try to make sure they laugh and we joke. I get to know my customers as well as just tattoo them. You know, I'm not one of those shut up, sit still guys, you know. If you're comfortable with them, it's easier to sit there, you know, because it hurts. You know, it doesn't feel good sometimes, especially when you're doing big detailed stuff and you're layering color on top of color on top of color. It gets a little old. You know, when I'm doing any other kind of art, I have a style. Tattooing, I tend to be a generalist. I don't tend to do things that have my style too much. I mean, every once in a while, I'll get the opportunity to, just draw something in my comic book style or graphic style or illustrative style. And those are always my favorite pieces. But for the most part, they pick out a style that they like in it and pick out the design that they like. And I have no problems doing, with tattooing, I can do a bunch of different styles. Unfortunately, not a lot of people like my style of tattooing. I don't know, it's too much illustration, too busy. And a lot of my stuff that I paint and draw wouldn't make a good tattoo. It might make a great book, it might make a great painting, but the tattoo might be too busy. So I have to kind of knock it back a little bit. I kind of think of tattooing as my style of mittens. I've got gloves on or something that's holding me back a bit. I don't know. I have to kind of like tone it down, make it easier to see. I'm also looking at longevity, I like, the old Franklin Booth tight lined, cross-hatching woodcut style of drawing and painting. I love that ultra detail, but most of that in a tattoo gets lost over time. And in Florida, it doesn't take that much time for that to disappear. So, I have to kind of pull it back a little bit. That's one thing that I really pride myself on. And when someone comes in with something, like out of the blue, and they want it then and there, and it's going to be a custom piece. A lot of people will send them away for a bit, have them come back, go do some research and find some stuff. I tend to go right off the fly. I don't know, I've always worked with deadlines. Doing commercial artwork and stuff, there was always a deadline, and I always tend to work well with them. Creative blocks, say if I'm trying to work out a design, and I'm, going over my head and everything's looking kind of samey, I'll just, maybe do some research, look at some books, look online. Now there's AI you can use, but the old methods would be to look at books or other people's art for inspiration. And in my house in particular, I'm surrounded by it. And with the internet, I have access to it. And, that's all I need to do is look at a few other people's things here and there, and boom, I'm off and running. I like the fact that when someone comes in with an idea, I can draw it right there and then. I like to freehand on people, so I can just get right to it. I don't like to come with a finished piece of work, color and all. If they bring me one, that's one thing. But to come up with one, by the time I've done all that detailing and finish, I like to work iteratively. I like to, if I do something one day, if I'm going to repeat it the next day, it's going to be better. It's going to be a little better here, I'm going to make a little change there, so it's not ever going to be the same. It's always going to incrementally get a little better, and so when people give me when I come with a finished drawing, then I know what it's going to look like at the end. That's boring to me. When I draw right on them, I'm as excited to see the finished piece as they are. And as far as it might not come out good, well, I know what my restrictions are. I know what skin can handle and take over the time. And I'm not going to stop until it comes out good. So, and it's never a problem. But that's the fun part too. And at the end, the big surprise everybody gets when they look in the mirror, that big smile, that's what makes it all. That's when I know I've done a good thing. Is when they look in the mirror, I'm looking at their face. You take that smile or that attitude, or they get a hop in their step, then I know that, okay, it's good. We did a good job.
What keeps art interesting for you?
There's always new stuff. There's always something new. Always something new. Like those artists I grew up on and stuff, I still look back at their stuff. But if they were the only ones I ever looked at, I'd be bored with them by now, there's always someone new doing something different. It never gets boring, as far as art goes. And tattoos, I see all these new styles popping up. There's nothing new happening now that wasn't happening in the old. The difference is, a lot of the stuff that people see now, we tried back then, doesn't work very well, or at least over time or in certain areas. At the same time, there was stuff with color back then we tried to do, but the ink back then just wouldn't allow it. There was stuff. Yellow was really difficult to get in the 80s. It was really watery, and so without a major primary, mixing, you were kind of held back a little bit. It didn't have the longevity or light fastness that it does now. And even still it fades, it lasts a little more. So you're able to push that a little bit better.
So, if somebody found one of your paintings, your comics, or your tattoos in like 100 years, what would you hope they understood about the person that made it?
Oh, I don't want to know anything about me. That's not important. That's what I do. I don't have an ego that way. Matter of fact, I'm embarrassed about that. I don't usually post stuff as very often. I'm not one of those get out there and put your face in there things. It's not, for me, it is about the work I've left behind. If someone found one of those things and it was still around in 100 years, that would be good enough for me. That would be my mark. Nobody knows George Washington. We've all read books about him, but they were all written years after he died. We know what he did, but we don't know who he was. You died tomorrow, and someone wrote a book about you. How accurate do you think it would be? Like, who in your life knows you that well? It's better to be, I think, mysterious. Then you get more exciting stuff written about you. So I tend to lean more towards that. I tend to not, I let the work speak for itself. And if it's not speaking, then I got to go back to the drawing board and turn up the volume on the artwork a little bit, maybe, But mostly I'm doing it to please me. If I'm satisfied, then that's my goal, And I've got pretty, my bar varies depending where I am that day, but it's just about a creative let out. And if I can make a living doing that while, it sounds weird, pleasing myself, I would like that'd be a very good way to be, So, yes, I'd like to make a living pleasuring myself.
All right, man.
And on that note.